This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Nick Jain, your CEO of IdeaScale, your Harvard MBA. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Phantom, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. Had a great workout today, and weather's awesome. Life is good.
So we're in New Hampshire. Are you still in Mass? Or are you?
No, I'm based in the great city of Philadelphia, city of brotherly love.
Oh,
I
cool.
miss New Hampshire, although it must be getting cold up there.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I love this. I'm a New Englander, so that's the leaves are changing, everything's nice. But yeah, we like to talk to people like yourself because you're a CEO. You got some of a leading software company that deals with innovation. We like to talk to people who have that creative spark, and we'll get into your story. A couple of things we always ask any guest before we get into the depth of your story is like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Sure, I love two things in life. Number one, I absolutely love learning professionally, and number two, I just like building stuff. In high school, I was a carpenter. Today, in college, I built like weird mathy things, and today I built companies.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what I was playing with a Rector sets. I'm a software developer, a software design, BSA system analyst. So left and right brain, kind of Renaissance idea that you can have creativity and you can have that level of discipline. I think sometimes it's cool to have them merge. What they used to call it a Renaissance person. They can have that kind of mindset. But I
Yeah.
think it's important. We can talk about innovation and maybe like in terms of like what actually promotes innovation. Is it more an expanding mindset or a closed kind of mindset? You would think it would be more expansive.
Sure. So innovation in our view, and this is again what we do for a living, we build software that helps large organizations innovate. Innovation is a little bit different at the individual level versus at the organizational level. At the individual level, it's all about giving yourself the resources and the time to let ideas incubate. The resources mean, look, you're not going to come up with a great new theorem in physics or a great new piece of software or a great new piece of art unless you've learned about what sort of art is already out there. You need some base foundational knowledge in the air and skills in the area, right? I could
Mhm.
might be the greatest, smartest person ever, but if I don't know how to sculpt, I'm not going to come up with the greatest sculpture. So at an individual level, you need some foundational set of skills and knowledge. And then you also just need time to let it percolate in your brain and to incubate and for that creativity eventually to come out. At an organizational level, it's much different. At an organizational level, you need three things. Number one, you need the right people. Number two, you need the right incentives for those people to innovate and contribute to your organization. And number three, you need the right processes and technology. I think one of the problems that organizations make, or one of the incorrect assumptions that organizations make, is they think creativity is spontaneous the way it is at an individual level. It's not the eureka moments in the shower, but rather it's a process. And when you rely on individual level innovation at a corporate level or organizational level, you end up inevitably failing.
Oh, that's interesting because sometimes like that spark of an idea, comes by accident. If you're an engineer or you're a scientist, there's some things that come that you didn't expect, like aspartame. That was not expected. Okay, right? That the sweet taste of it wasn't planned out.
So yes and no, but the so I don't know the specific case of aspartame, but somebody doesn't just come up with a new chemical out of nowhere, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
a chemist. I'm not no matter how I'm not going to come up with a great new chemical item, whether that be for plastics or food. I have to have some base knowledge in chemistry. So if you actually look at the research of creativity, very few people just come up with things out of thin air. It has been percolating inside their head for sometimes months, years, decades, and then all of a sudden the jigsaw puzzle of all the different interesting pieces of their life where they saw something yesterday, they learned something 5 years ago, their wife or husband said something to them today, all of a sudden all the pieces click and you feel it came out of nowhere, but it's really been incubating for a long time. Think of it almost like a child. It's in a womb for 9 months and then it pops out, but it didn't just come out of nowhere. It's been developing for 9 months.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like when it comes to like an artist, it's like your 10,000 hours being
Exactly. Yes.
on your instrument, right?
Yeah.
But it's the kind of like your ability. But to synthesize there's a concept of like an arts of like stream of consciousness, right? Of pulling from the muse. This
Yes.
idea, and the idea is like it doesn't like you said, it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it seems to be spontaneous in that moment.
Yes,
but it actually
absolutely.
is informed by the things you like. Like you might be listening to Chopin, you might be listening to Bach, you might be listening to something, you might have seen something in the paper, and then suddenly something synthesizes and there's stuff in your subconscious and it comes out. But it's not
Yeah.
that you didn't, it doesn't totally come from nowhere. There's a
Oh,
base.
100%. The analogy is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term called criticality. It's this notion in science. Think of a pile of sand, right? You add one grain at a time, and it'll just keep growing, growing, and growing very gently. But you hit one wrong a grain of sand, and the entire thing can collapse. That is
Mhm.
called criticality, where something is unstable and it seems stable, nothing seems to happen, and then one tiny little event all of a sudden makes lots
Oh,
of
yeah.
things happen. And
Cascade.
creativity is much the same way, where there's a pile of sand, and it doesn't have to be negative. It just means that all of a sudden, as you think, it's spontaneous, but there's this entire structure built underneath it that is hard to predict. It's hard to calculate. Our science and mathematics hasn't figured out when those moments of creativity and spark happen. We just know there's a foundation, there's a whole bunch of things that underlie the foundation of creativity that can be inculcated at an individual level.
Also, like, it seems like with innovation, sometimes, like, people are following trends like a diet, like, there's a fad diet, like, you could say I've been talking to some people because 'cause I'm in software design too, that AI is the hot thing, so everybody's trying to apply AI everywhere, right? And sometimes it's not the right business case, right? Just it's like sometimes just because something's hot doesn't mean it's actually the thing that you should use, and maybe it's not the right tool for the job. But is there a problem like with AI? Like everybody just wants to use it. Maybe they don't have the right business case for what they're trying to do, and they think it's just going to give them some kind of magic pill that's going to just solve all their problems.
It's funny that you say that. So, like you, Phantom, I run a software company. And one of the interview questions I always get asked by all the industry analysts when they are reviewing my software company for all those review publications out there is, hey, what are you doing with AI? And my answer is, look, we've carefully involved AI in two areas. Number one, in helping people write better, and number two, in analyzing qualitative data. But we have not added AI to everything and everywhere. A lot of software companies have rushed to do it. One of my colleagues said, "Hey, should we change our company name to IdeaScale.ai because that's a hot thing to do?"
So,
Look, it'll raise my marketing profile for a bit, but did I change the substance of what I did, and did I add AI meaningfully into my product and make my customers' lives better? Probably not, right? Again, I love AI. I use it actively in my day-to-day life. We use it actively in the company. But do we need to jam AI into every piece of software out there? Probably not today. Maybe over time, yes, but certainly not today because AI doesn't fit in everywhere.
yeah, it's like certain like workflow situations that have some level of complexity. I work in insurance, right? And there's certain things that you could do, but there's a lot of unhappy paths. There's a lot of unhappy paths. There's a lot of exception processing, and there's a lot of rules that's like, and it can't just be done with a prompt engineer, right? It's based on like death tables and actuaries running these algorithms. Not that AI couldn't help with that, and it can. But it's not always the solution if you're trying to build a policy administration system. AI is not the tool to solve that policy and administration, new business front end. That's not the solution for that tool.
Exactly. I agree with that. At least AI as it exists today is an effective tool in almost any circumstance. It aids an effective human being to become more effective, but it
Mhm.
doesn't replace the human, at least today. Now, technologies continue to advance, right?
Yeah.
I fully believe in, whether it be 10 years or 50 years, these AI technologies will become general purpose and can replace human beings. That's a much greater social problem that we need to figure out how to solve as a society, but certainly the AI that exists today, it is a
Mm.
tool that must be used by a human being. Just like a hammer is totally useless
Yeah.
without a human being whacking away at something, AI tools today still need a human being to guide them, to teach them, to leverage them to accomplish some economic goal that we're all striving to achieve.
Well, I've heard the argument for AI if it replaces, kind of menial work or work that's like takes too much time, is not efficient for a human being to do it, is that we're all supposed to put our critical thinking caps on. But my problem is with this is just a point of view. If the American educational system doesn't actually create people who are critical thinkers, and then you get rid of all the work with not everybody's got an MBA. Now everybody's got a BA. Now everybody's got an associate's degree. So they don't have the critical thinking capability.
So
Who's going to buy the product if you all want everybody to have be MBAs and they're not all going to be MBAs?
So I agree with that with two minor adjustments. Number one, there's a limit to how much critical thinking you can teach to everyone or how much IQ you can teach to everyone, right? I'm a pretty smart guy, but no matter how much education I get, am I going to be the next Einstein? That's pretty unlikely. Not everyone can be Einstein. That's what makes individuals like him exceptional, right? Not everyone can be the next Marie Curie. Not everyone can develop like DNA snipping snips or not snipping. What is it called? CRISPR, right? It requires a certain level of genius. Not everyone is that level of genius. That's number one. Education won't solve that. Number two is, look, if AI is not AI, I firmly believe is not just trending towards replacing menial tasks. It is over time, and we're already seeing this today. It's replacing informational or intellectual tasks, the tasks that have been the special province of human beings' brains up until recently. That's a much more terrifying future because what makes us special is that all that gray matter in here, and that's
Mhm.
going to be less unique. It's already less unique than it was 10 years ago, and it's certainly going to be no longer unique somewhere in the next somewhere in the next 5 to 50 years. And that at that point, we have a much greater social problem to solve. Like, what do human beings do when our brains that have made us so special for the last 10,000 years versus everything else out there aren't special anymore? And there's a piece of silicon that is faster, smarter, better, and more educated than us. The good news, by the way, is if you actually look at the research at AI tends to be smarter than us, but also tends to be kinder and more ethical than us, which is a great thing. So rather than Skynet, we actually may have kind and generous AI overlords.
Mhm. Well, it depends on what the bias is in the learning library,
Yeah,
but, there's a whole 'nother issue with that, but,
I'm
the
saying AIs tend to be smarter and more ethical.
yeah, yeah, but it depends on what's brought in, you know? Because if you have an idea, like, if it's scanning what is beauty, and you don't scan in all different types of beauty, right? You have a preconceived idea of beauty that you're bringing into it, okay? It's gonna just know what you gave it.
So I've got a funny example for that. So one funny bias I detected. I wanted AI to generate a photo of me. I'm ethnically Indian, so I asked it to draw a photo of an Indian tech CEO, right? And it generated 5 or 6 images, and every single one was firstly male, okay, uh, but which is fine because I'm male. But secondly, every single one was overweight. And I'm like, the AI thinks that every single Indian tech CEO is overweight, which is really funny because if you look at the CEOs of Microsoft or Google, which are both who are both ethnically South Asian, they're in quite good shape. So the bias was funny because it was kind of slightly offensive, but also it was not representative of some of the
Yeah.
extraordinary leaders of our world.
Depends on what they get trained on, you know? So, like, that's all that's a whole nother argument, but the idea, well, being an artist, my whole, conversation with, like, innovation also is human beings have a unique spark from their individual, like, capability, right? So, as an artist, everybody has their own vision. AI is not gonna have that unique human spirit vision. It might be able to do something faster to me, but it is actually valuable. Is it actually because there's a lot of AI art, but I know a lot of graphic artists. My daughter's a graphic artist, and there's something like in the emotional impact. Just because you can make art that looks good doesn't mean that it actually has emotional or heart or like spirit impact. And that's my argument with some of the machine stuff is, it's even with music. It can do it, but it doesn't lack the heart. It lacks the heart. It lacks the soul. And so if that becomes not important, like people think heart and soul and spirit in the human individuality is no longer valuable. I think that's a problem.
So I agree. So I'm an optimist on that front. I don't think people are going to give up their humanity anytime soon. I think that's going to remain a core part of who we are as a species. We will love, and romance and art and beauty and all the things that, in the Dead Poet Society, all the things we live for. If you've ever seen that movie, he said, Robin Williams' character says, medicine, law, business. These are all things we do to live, but what do we live for? I think was the paraphrasing the quote. However, I would disagree with you on, I think AI will eventually be able to create true beauty and emotion and replicate emotion in a, I don't think we're there yet, but we are working technologically on replicating those elements of beauty that are truly unique to the human condition or to the human eye. We're getting there. We're not there today, but we will get there. At that point, robots will be able to generate true art in a deep sense of the word, not just beautiful images.
That's interesting. In terms of their sentience, I wonder what their emotional. Because a lot of times with an artist, it's what you've gone through, the pain. So you tell me a machine's going to feel the pain that actually drives the art.
I think I am an optimist on that front. I think a lot of, again, this is my perspective. I have a small bit of expertise in this, but the mathematically almost everything that we experience and live through or have lived through in the past can be boiled down to some complex set of equations. They may be insanely complicated, right? And at some point, computers will be big enough, smart enough, algorithms big enough, smart enough that they can read in those equations. Right now, we haven't figured out the equations that define emotions because emotions are insanely complex, but we'll get there eventually. And at the same time, computers are getting smarter, bigger, faster. So you combine those two at some point, could be 5 years from now, could be 50 years, could be 500 years. I'm more on the order of like 5 to 20 years, I think we'll be there. Because I think these technologies are advancing much faster than most people give them credit for, both the hardware and the software.
Mhm. Well, I guess that gets into the meritocracy in terms of like how you measure things, right? So, like when you're in an organization, the people measure, like, okay, is it, the people who click through and actually buy the product, or the people who actually visit the site, or the profitability of the company, or the shareholders, being able to make their gains. In terms of meritocracy, like what are your measures? What are your KPIs?
Sorry, for me or for AI? I didn't understand the
Well,
question.
I guess in terms of you're thinking about like ideocracy, is it the idea that makes profit? Is it are there other KPIs for a meritocracy other than profit?
Sure. So it depends. So I'll use an example. We provide an idea generation, an idea collection, idea evaluation software. So we're literally trying to create an idea meritocracy through our software. And we have customers who are private sector customers, we have nonprofits, and we have governments as customers. And each of those three types of organizations has distinctly different goals, right? A government is not so worried about profit. They have fixed budgets. They're not worried about generating more revenues, right? They're not going to jack up the price for your driver's license at the driver's license office. What they're worried about is, hey, can we use the resources that we have efficiently, and can we serve our constituents and our voters? Can we make our voters happy? Right? Or solve the problem that we're set to, our mission, right? That could be the Department of Transportation making the roads beautiful, or the Federal Highway Administration. Nonprofits. I work with a big one of the biggest food banks in the country, and they use our software to figure out how they can serve more people food, right? People who are in need, and so they're not measuring again profit. They are measuring like how many people did we serve and get food to, so they're not
Efficiency,
hungry.
more efficiency. Yeah,
Yeah, and then on the private sector, right? Look, if you're using ideas to generate new products, you certainly care about profit, right? That's the goal. You generate more revenues, but you may be trying to save costs. That's very different, but that's also profit oriented. But our customers may use our software to generate ideas to engage more employees. That's not a profit motive directly. That is a employee happiness retention metric. So a lot of organizations, especially leading organizations, do care about how their employees feel, how their brand is perceived, whether they are ethically involved in the world. And some of those, in fact, may be negative profit propositions, right? Like generally being environmentally friendly for most organizations is actually a negative profit proposition.
it'll
They
cost you
should
more
just
money.
burn the world, but they don't do that because they hold themselves to a higher standard.
Well, it's a long run. It's maybe not short term.
Yeah.
Because when you burn the world long term, you might have short term profits by quarter, but in the long term you won't. So, uh,
There's an old economics joke. In the long run, we're all dead, which basically refers to like you really shouldn't work to think about the long run. There's the ethical argument against it is if everyone thought that way, we're going to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly.
yeah, well, you burned your resources out, so then you
Exactly.
don't eventually you can't operate, right? So, but eventually, you don't know if you're going to get there. But in terms of like, it's interesting. You talked about the nonprofit. You talking about the government. They all had different goals of different types of KPIs, key
Mhm.
performance indicators. So your software is flexible enough to work in these different groups. And people might say, oh, maybe I would only be working with the private people.
Yeah, look, my goal,
But
my,
you're talking about we
yeah.
could work
Yeah,
in different
IdeaScale's
sectors.
mission
So
is to create an
yeah.
idea meritocracy. We believe that the best ideas should win. And that is a foundational principle that should apply to any sort of organization. That's a universal principle, right? Good ideas should work whether you're a government agency, whether you're private sector, whether you're in India, whether you're in Africa. All organizations do better when the best ideas float to the top, and they're the ones that come into become reality and manifest rather than the CEO's ideas or the CEO's friends' ideas. So
Mhm.
that's a universal principle. That's why software like ours is universal. And again, it's not dissimilar from how accounting software exists, whether you're a government organization or a private sector organization, because every organization needs to keep track of what's going on inside it. Every organization needs to innovate. It's quite simple.
So that kind of goes towards something you mentioned, like innovation sometimes, if the boardroom has a closed mind, it's not an open boardroom, right? And they're actually not taking in ideas from outside of a certain set of people, right? Or a certain set of preconceived notions because we've always done it this way, or we feel they know, like they understand what it is, but
Yeah,
they're not willing to challenge themselves, right? And so if you come in with your software might challenge some preconceived notions or some concepts, do you run into resistance if you bring up potential idea to your ID com framework that challenges their overall your mindset?
Yes, no. I want to make one correction, and then I'll answer your question directly. I don't think most CEOs and boards are close-minded, right? I That's very rare in an organization. They exist, but the most aren't close-minded. It's just they don't have an opportunity to listen to a diverse set of opinions, right? The CEO is not often hanging out in a warehouse on the other side of the country and listening to the ideas of his forklift manager because he or she just not often out walking the floor in a warehouse that often. That forklift manager may have a great idea. I used to run a warehouse company, and I actually walked the floor all the time late at night, and I would listen to my floor guys because they would have cool ideas on how to make the company better. Um, so it's not that they're not open-minded. It's just they have less opportunity to fully tap the ideas of their customers, of their junior employees, people in other offices who aren't sitting in HQ within 20 feet of the CEO. There's a academic study that like the amount of influence you have in an organization is directly correlated to 1 over the square of how many feet away you are from the CEO. So if you're 10 feet away, you're twice as important, you're 4 times more important than somebody who's 20 feet away, which is absolutely crazy. But
Mhm.
to answer your question directly, look, yes, software like any innovation software that disrupts what an organization is doing is going to rock the boat a little. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Organizations that are comfortable with having their boats rocked, they're anti-fragile organizations in Nicholas Nassim Taleb's words. He's an NYU prof. And anti-fragile organizations are much more successful over the long term because they are more adaptive and resilient. And a practical example of this is we use our own software. I put my ideas for how the company should get better on the software. And you can actually go on our website and see people have voted down the CEO's ideas with negative. So I have negative votes on some ideas because people think they're terrible ideas. Now, in good organizations, that's allowed, where the people can say the CEO's ideas are stupid publicly and not be shamed or penalized for it. In bad organizations, people vote the CEO's ideas up because he or she's the CEO and we got to make him look good.
Yeah, that's
That's
what I'm
that's
talking
a
about, the
bad
echo
organization.
chamber.
Bad
Yeah,
ideas should die. Good ideas should win.
well, that's the echo chamber because you're saying like like that formula about the distance to the CEO. Like, the CEO has information based on like your research, but they choose not to get out of that pattern, so it's like an echo chamber. That
Mhm.
is my point. But in terms of when you give advice to tech executives, um, what's the lessons learned that you've done, experienced over
Sure.
time?
So I've run companies now in trucking, men's shoes, and software, and spent a bunch of time on Wall Street as a professional investor. I think that there's 3 areas that tech executives, some would, or 3 pieces of advice I would give to tech executives. Number one is understand how your product creates value for its customers. Number two, uh, tech executives really need to believe in their product at a deep emotional level. I believe in what IdeaScale does. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you today. And then thirdly, understand how your business makes money. This is really simple and it's really obvious, but so many tech executives, because they're young 20 somethings who got a bunch of venture capital money, don't actually know how their business makes money. And that's really bad, because any business at the end of the day, any private sector, whether you're making shoes, whether you're making sandwiches, whether you're making software, needs to know how you make money. And if you don't know how you do that, eventually you end up losing money, and that's bad for everyone involved.
Yeah, it seems like if you don't understand your product, you just think it's a widget. You have like no connection to it. You don't have the passion of like a Steve Jobs. You don't have the passion of like a Ben and Jerry's, like they actually founded the company. But if you come in, you're from another industry, right? You,
Hello?
you know, oh, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay.
One of us faded out. I
Okay.
apologize for that. I'm not sure if it was
I
me or
guess in
you.
my example, there's a period of time was like if you're not an engineer, right, and and you get into an engineering firm like cars or airplanes, and all you care about is making profitability, you could lower the quality of your airplanes, you could lower the quality of your cars, and there's a history within the automotive industry where that stuff happened. There's a history within the airplane industry where that happened. So in terms of those situations when people are making their goals, do you have any influence in terms of like, okay, is this actually an adequate goal for what your business is doing?
So that's where, like, a good board of directors and who sets good goals and provides good governance comes into, right? You don't, I think bad boards of directors set very short term oriented goals, and that's how they reward their executive teams. Good boards of directors realize that a company or organization is not about how much profit it made this quarter or this year, but it's going to generate value for everyone, for society, for its employees, for its customers, for its shareholders over 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And if you look at the great corporations or great organizations, they are governed and not managed. And that's an important word in my view. They are well governed. And that's a really difficult thing to do. There's a lot of good research on it. If you go read like what the business school professors say, there's best practices on how you do corporate governance. And unfortunately, most organizations don't follow it because people are either too lazy to read what good corporate governance is, or because it runs so counterintuitive. Like, bad corporate governance is command and control with one person who has absolute uncontrolled power and is focused on the short term. Good governance is laying out a set of ethical principles and business principles and goals that an organization should achieve, and all short-term metrics simply build up to those long-term goals and are not goals unto themselves.
Yeah, it just seems like sometimes the stock price, the profitability, the efficiency numbers, because if you work with the actuaries, I mean that's their wheelhouse. They're going to give you all the numbers. And then if you actually look like what is the prime goal purpose of the company versus what the actuaries are telling you in terms of your profitability, your efficiency, your stock price, your all those things, right? And so the board of governance then sometimes would maybe hit the wall when they say, well, if we do what you want, we're going to lose profitability by 10%, by 20%. And then if there's going to be an argument of why would we do that? If what's the so who has to hold the reins or get people to value that board of governance is, I guess, their concepts. How do you get people to believe that those things are important?
So two things. Firstly, stock markets are actually incredibly intelligent, right? So if you make a bad short-term decision that's actually good for the long term, stock markets generally are smart enough not to penalize you for that. And there's a ton of research on this that if you decide to give up a little bit of profit or even a lot of profit this quarter and it's going to make you 10 times more of that in a year or 2 years or 5 years, stock markets are really smart and give you credit for that on a discounted present value basis using a fancy term. Again, being a hedge fund guy. But secondly, there's kind of an old joke, right? You get what you vote for. So if you, as a bunch of shareholders, vote in boards of directors who don't have the backbone to create a long-term vision and stick to it and are instead very short-term focused, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to destroy long-term value. You get what you vote for in life. That's true in politics. That's true in corporate governance. Good shareholders, smart shareholders, try and have boards of directors that are long-term oriented and objective and rational, but also have the backbone and strength to say, we're going to take a stand here. And that could be a financial stand or an ethical stand where they say, look, we can make more money doing this, but this is illegal or unethical, and we're not going to do it. And it's great when you see organizations with strong boards like that.
Well, it's more of a holistic vision where you're not just looking at one aspect of the bottom line. Um,
Exactly. Right. There's fancy terms for it. The fancy term that's taken the world over by storm over the last 10 years is called the triple bottom line. I always forget what the three bottom lines. It's like financial, social, and I forget what the last one is. But basically, organizations that have multiple goals simultaneously. Um, but again, in well-run organizations, they have missions that are obvious that involve multiple goals, right? Like if you're a pharmaceutical, often good pharmaceutical companies say, look, we want to relieve human suffering and pain,
a
right?
lot of
Or some
research and
variation of
development.
that.
Yeah,
They
they're
need to
heavy
make
into
money while doing
research.
it.
Well, they're heavy
Exactly.
into research and development. That's their whole wheelhouse.
Yeah. But they're doing it for a purpose. They're not doing R&D because they just want to have a bunch of scientists and lab coats. They're doing it because they want to alleviate human suffering and disease. And that's a good social goal. And it's great that they can make money doing it. That's a win-win. That's a win for society, and that's a win for people who are suffering from a variety of challenging diseases.
At the innovation, there's a reason for the innovation because eventually, when they come up with all these miracle cures, or it's not a miracle, it's because it's the hard work they put into it and the investment they put into it. It's a good example that of a long-term strategy. Like if it takes 10 years to do this, then it still is valuable
Yeah,
because
and that's exactly. Actually, it's funny that we came upon pharmaceutical drugs, but pharmaceuticals are a classic example of where shareholders and boards of governors are very smart because it takes 10 years to get a drug to market between
yeah,
the
it's like
basic research, the FDA, the trials, getting it FDA approved. But that's something where shareholders like, look, no, you're going to spend $1 billion to develop this drug. That's a lot of money. You could have just given us that $1 billion today, and we could all, have a
yeah,
nice dividend. But no, they're smart enough to realize that $1 billion is going to create $3 billion of value, $5 billion of value 10 years from now. And that again, stock markets are really, really smart at doing this. People don't give them. Everyone assumes stock markets are irrational. That may be true on a day-to-day or quarter-to-quarter basis. But over kind of the medium term horizon, about 2 to 3 years, stock markets are insanely smart at figuring out whether companies are being well managed or poorly managed.
hmm I think the short term is always kind of like the kind of you know burden because people go quarter to quarter, and even though the long term is supposed to have an effect, yeah, you understand what I'm getting at. But
Mhm.
in terms of business executives understanding finance, I mean, I would think any business executive, that's their wheelhouse. But do you find that they actually have a misunderstanding of where they should be?
So I strongly disagree that most executives have an understanding of finance or accounting. And I'll give an example at business school, right? I did an MBA, and we had 2 weeks of accounting class, which was taught entirely via the case method. So I am confident that many of my classmates graduated without a fundamental understanding of accounting, and many without an understanding of corporate finance. And those are
Mm,
two different things, by the way. Accounting is how you actually do the addition subtraction. Finance is how is value created. And that's true. That's for somebody who did an MBA. Think of how many people have just been promoted up in an organization, whether it be through the sales arm or through the accounting arm. That doesn't mean that you actually understand accounting or corporate finance. And that's really important for anyone who, in my opinion, if you want a C-level job in any department, whether it be marketing, whether it be operations, whether it be technology, you have to understand how you account for things, right? Like what are expenses, what are revenues, how do they add up and subtract up, but also how does your organization create value? And that's what corporate finance theory is all about, right? You don't have to take 20 years of it, but you have to understand some very basic principles like what's a DCF, what is present value, how do you create value, what is ROI? And these are things that if you throw these terms around, many executives won't understand. And I speak from experience. When I was investing in private equity deals and hedge fund deals, many of my executives who I worked with who were running $100 million or $1 billion companies didn't have this. Now, they often had a great CFO who understood it, but it's still kind of terrifying if, one person in the senior room of 5 is the only one who actually understands how the business is fundamentally making money or not.
Yeah, and can they actually tell that story to the other people in the room so they understand it?
It depends. If somebody's open-minded, they can be open to learning anything. If somebody speaks to me in French, I may not understand it, but if I have the time and effort to go learn French, I'll understand it. And if I don't, then I don't, and they're just speaking French to me or Latin
Yeah.
or Chinese.
Well, it's a matter of like influence. Like if you have that actuarial or finance knowledge, but it ends up being just only you're the only expert in the room, you're the only SME, then they might not understand the urgency of the things that you're talking about.
No, but I don't think that's an acceptable response, right? If you're an executive of any non-trivial corporation, right, whether you're running a $10 million company or $10 billion company, you need to, it is my view that every single person in a meaningful position of authority in a large organization needs to have some basic understanding of corporate finance. Because if you
Mhm.
don't do that, you have no idea how good decisions are made,
No,
right?
I think it's
How do you
important.
decide how a good marketing, what defines a good marketing campaign, right? You don't. You're just kind of going on gut feel, right?
Well, you might
And
be
maybe
going because if all your guys come from sales, or all your guys come from engineering, or all your guys come from like those departments. And sometimes what I've seen in companies, like the head of the company is an engineer. They
which is
might
great.
It's
Engineers are
great.
smart people.
They're smart
Salespeople are
people.
smart people.
Yeah, smart people, but like if they don't have they figure because they know the math. Yeah, they know engineering math, but they might not know the finance math as you're indicating. So people might not assume that they would understand what the finance guys are talking about.
And none of this is rocket science, by the way, right? It's all you can from a couple of from like a weekend course on Wikipedia or a 2 week executive course at an MBA program. You can go learn these things.
Oh yeah.
So these are all learnable skills, but it's very terrifying to me that there's a lot of corporate executives out there that don't understand how their own businesses work, and they're leading companies and responsible for the livelihoods of hundreds or thousands of employees, and yet they are kind of it's like driving a ship while blind,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That's a horrifying
Like
proposition to
throwing
me. If
at the
I remember,
dartboard, you're throwing at the dartboard and you figure everybody in that room is not throwing at the dartboard. Before you're telling me like that potentially they could be if they don't have the finance or the actuarial understanding that they could be doing that and they could be taking other um metrics or KPIs or other people's intentions and thinking that that is the most important thing they should be working
yeah,
on.
and I'll give a practical example for this. Over the last 10 years, there's been this mentality called growth at any price in the
Mm,
technology world, where you should just grow no matter what it costs. And that's really funny because that's been wired into CEOs' brains. Venture capitalists thought about it, but it's well known and has been known for about 100 years that growth at any price is a terrible idea. There is a price where growth is good. There is a price where growth is bad. And if you can't figure, and that's a number that you can calculate. Now, you
yeah, we
can't
can figure
necessarily
it out.
calculate it out to 8 decimal places, but you can generally figure out, hey, should I spend $1 to sell this burger or $1 million to sell this burger? If you're spending $1 million to sell one burger, you could
Diminishing
just intuitively,
returns.
you don't have to do any
Yeah,
math. You know it's bad,
yeah,
but there is
diminishing
math.
returns. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might. It's like the idea, like in music industry, right? We have streaming. Like you got to get 1 billion streams to make any money at 0.006 of a penny. If
Yeah.
you actually sell a vinyl record, you could sell 2,000 vinyl records and make more money than you could ever get streaming. So you don't have to have a million views. You could be an artist that only has 50,000 fans. And if 2,000 of them buy your vinyl, you can actually do better than if 50,000 people streamed your song on Spotify.
It's
So
funny. I had this exact conversation with somebody at a poker table like 3 weeks ago, where I was explaining that streaming is great for Spotify. It's great for Apple. It is terrible for the artist unless your name happens to be Taylor Swift.
yeah, you got to be in the top 10 of their upper tier.
Mhm.
Their upper tier, they do all right.
Yeah,
Anybody
streaming has
else?
destroyed the economics of the music industry, right?
Yeah,
Because it is basically, it's actually great for the listener. For me as a non-musician, I get access to
it's
all the world's
devalued the
music.
art. It's
Yeah, it's
devalued the
devalued
art.
the art. It's
Yeah,
compressed the entire value chain, which means labels earn less, artists earn less, platforms earn a little bit more, and consumers get art for basically free, which again, awesome for me as end consumer. I'm glad I'm not a musician, but I understand it's absolutely awful for artists, both big and small. Again, unless you're the top five, but
yeah.
everyone else outside the top 5 or 10 is absolutely damaged by modern streaming economics or art economics.
Yeah, it's just an example of a technology that's appeared to be great, streaming for music, it appeared to be a cool thing, and it ended up being detrimental to the art that it's supposed to be promoting.
Mhm. Well, yeah, it's detrimental to the art, but in all fairness, streaming was never invented for the artist. It was invented for the consumer so I could access art more easily, right?
Mhm.
So instead of for those who are of your audience who are old enough, instead of walking around with a Walkman or with an iPod, right? I can just access all of the world's music anytime. And if my mood changes, I can switch to different music in a few clicks. And that's an amazing power. It's awesome for an end consumer.
Well, it's
It's
consumer
revolutionary.
oriented to the detriment of the artist,
Oh
so
yes, yeah. It is not a
you
win
don't want you never
proposition.
wanna sell a product that puts your artist out into the street.
Of course, no. I That's not the business I run. I try and do a win-win-win where it's good for my customers, my employees, and my shareholders. But look, there are business models that change the value, how the pie is cut, right?
Yeah.
Streaming platforms not only shrunk the pie of economics, they also dramatically shifted the pie, the slice of the pie, away from the artists, a little bit more towards the labels, and a little bit more towards the platform, and hugely towards the consumer.
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of independent artists, and what our solution has been to, don't give the song to the streaming service, put it out in a physical form, tour, and live within a certain level of being an artist. So you can actually learn a living as an artist if you don't want to live high on the hog, right? And there are artists who can live at a level that you can't live on Spotify. But you could actually tour, you could do shows, you have merch tables, you go and you monetize your music through licensing, sync
Mhm.
licensing and things like that. So it becomes a different model. I
100%.
write
Yeah.
songs for like, video games and stuff like that. So you make more money licensing a song to be in a video game than you do on Spotify. The rate
Yeah.
the
And by the
rate to
way,
pay
like,
you is way higher.
one of my favorite artists is this battle rapper called Iron Solomon, and he, for whatever reason, didn't put his songs on Spotify. And I really like his actual, setting aside his battle rap, which I enjoy. I actually really like his songs, and so I went out and actually bought a CD of his songs. So,
Yeah, it's a
what it was,
strategy.
25 bucks. It's the first CD I've bought in like 25 years. But like, hey, if it's not available on Spotify, I like this guy. I want to support him. And he, like, both his battle rap career, which has really been enjoyable to me, but also his music, which I like. So I'm willing to shell out 25 bucks if I can't find it on Spotify. So that was a great decision he made, because if he was on Spotify, he wouldn't get it. I wouldn't pay
Yeah.
anything to see him.
Yeah, it's a strategy. Sometimes you might not be able to you have to come up with a different, uh, where place to sell. Like, if the place you sell is killing you, then you probably don't wanna be selling in that place.
100%.
But, in terms of, what do you think about like, the struggle of innovation? And we've been talking about it, but, like, do you your software helps, like, idea generation, right? Is that part of it?
Idea generation, idea collection, and idea evaluation, and then ultimately idea implementation. We take you from getting a bunch of cool ideas, figuring out which are good, to getting the good ideas turned into reality.
Because some people hit the wall and say, "I can't come up with anything." They're sitting there with a blank page. They can't come up with the idea, and so is that the kind of customer? The customer's hitting the wall, or their ideas weren't working. So this is an approach that they can take with you to actually stop that drought.
Well, we try and solve. There's many pain points to innovation. We try and solve all of the idea related ones. So number one, how do you come up with an idea in the first place? Firstly, you should never be looking at a blank page. Blank pages are not inspiring. Okay, go look at other ideas. Go look at something that gets your creative juices flowing. So, like if, for example, if you log into our platform for your company, your organization, or community you're interested in, let's say you're interested in the Tesla community, you log in, you'll see thousands of ideas from other people who care about Tesla, how to make Tesla cars better. Okay.
Hmm.
That's pretty cool. That gets your creative juices flowing. And even if you don't have a new idea yourself, you may have an idea on how to improve on somebody else's idea, because creative thinking is an iterative process and a collaborative process. So that's number one. It helps you solve like the blank slate, the writer's block problem. Number two is, look, let's be honest. There's good ideas and there's bad ideas. There's also good ideas whose time has not come. So if you have 1,000 ideas, how do you figure out which ones are good? How about you tap into the power of the crowd and you get people to upvote and downvote ideas the same way you would a Facebook post or TikTok, right? And
Hmm.
so certain ideas are so powerful, they become viral and they rise to the top. And those are almost always the best ideas. So we help you do that. And then finally, we help you go figure out whether the best idea is even possible and how to get it done, right? The best idea may sound great on paper, but it may violate the laws of physics. Everyone wants a perpetual motion machine. Turns out that violates the laws of physics. Yeah, we try to help you solve all of the innovation problems that your large organization faces. And I think we're pretty damn good at it, in fact.
That's pretty awesome. Cause like the example you're saying, like having like a forum or a group of individuals kind of like in a Tesla forum and they got better, the customers might say, I got a better idea than what Tesla's doing. And people talk about it and you can kind of mine it. That happens with like, in the video game community, they're fan made games.
Yeah.
And sometimes companies are smart enough, like Sega, a couple of times have actually taken guys who have kind of made fan based versions of Sega games. And instead of going and sending a cease and desist, they actually hired them and have them had them make a game because the fans actually liked their game better than what Sega was doing.
Well, that's how
So
Dota 2 came out, right? When because I don't know if you're a gamer at all, but Dota 1, Defense of the Ancients 1 was this really successful game, but it was built on Warcraft. It was built as a custom map on this old game called Warcraft 3, which is made by
mhm,
Blizzard. Blizzard wasn't a big fan of it. They didn't capitalize on it. And then Valve, the guys who own Steam, came along to the owner and said, of this game and said, hey, how about you just make this game brand new for us on our platform, which they did. And Dota is one of the most popular games in the world and has been for 12 years running now, which is insane. 12 years of the same
mhm,
video game still existing.
yeah. But sometimes you go to to an outside source or a source that maybe aren't your engineers, aren't your designers, aren't your people, but maybe they have a better way a mousetrap than you, you know.
Exactly.
So you have a way to kind of like scan for like the whole universe or like a
We
ecosystem.
call it an ecosystem. Your
Yeah.
ecosystem, and your ecosystem could be it could be people in your just your office building, because that's not just your floor or your cube. It's your office building. It could be people in your department. Could be people in your entire employee base. Could be your customers. Could be people in your country, your voters. Your ecosystem is any individuals or any organization's ecosystem is actually quite broad. Um,
Hmm.
and it's this notion of like, I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but it's something called predictive markets. So if
Hmm.
you look at, predictive markets are almost like stock markets for predicting events, like how much damage is a hurricane going to cause or who's going to be elected. And turns out these predictive markets where you can go gamble and say, like, I want to bet on this much on Kamala Harris winning versus Trump winning. And those markets tend to be insanely smart. And that's revealed a very powerful concept known as the intelligence of the crowd. There's all this information that's trapped in people's brains, but they each only have a little piece of information. But when you add all that information together, it's extraordinarily powerful. And what IdeaScale software really tries to do is help you put together all those little pieces into a much more powerful whole.
Hmm. That's interesting that you're able to put all that together. And so when you came up with this software, I mean, how long did it take you to come up with this idea? Is this something that like you've talked, it takes over time? How much time did it take to come up with this?
So I didn't actually invent the idea. I'm not the founder of IdeaScale. There were two gentlemen, Rob Hohen and Viv Paskern, who about 15 years ago, they saw that there was all these organizations, both governmental and private sector, were struggling to innovate. And then President Obama came out and said, look, government needs to be more innovative. And that was the aha moment. Excuse me.
Hmm.
That was the aha moment for Rob and Viv when they realized, wait, if even the government is saying they want to be innovative and they're trying to do this without any technology, like why don't we actually create some awesome technology for this? So that was the spark that kind of lit the fuse. Viv and Rob coded up the software. They got it running. The company's been around for 15 years. I was brought in as an external CEO about 2 years ago because we'd been very successful. And the goal was, okay, can Nick take this company from a successful company to a hyper successful global company? That's what I do for a living. I take companies that are already doing great and help them become even
Yeah.
more awesome, to become extraordinary, and to become world dominant competitors.
So that's a skill set that you've developed over time, and you have like in your wheelhouse, like you've come up with a strategy that works for different industries, or
Yeah.
you have
So look,
commonalities between all them all.
Yeah, so look, every organization at the end of the day has some similarities, right? Number one, they all have HR departments and finance departments and sales department and product departments and operations department. They have different departments. They all have similar politics at the end of the day. Number two, all organizations have a business model, right? Not And number three, all organizations need to have a growth strategy that needs to be implemented. My skill set, or the thing that I think I'm world class at, is I understand how businesses work really fundamentally, and I understand what is constant across all businesses. And so, whether I'm running a trucking company or a software company, I can bring those skills to bear. At IdeaScale, for example, over the past 2 years that I've been here, we've expanded our headcount by 20%. We've tripled our profit margins. We've expanded from 3 countries to 8 countries. And that is because IdeaScale was already in such a great place. Robin had built a great product and a great customer base who appreciate what we do. And my goal was now, okay, how do we institutionalize this organization, this amazing IdeaScale organization, and build upon the product so we can become a globally relevant company, which we are well on our way to doing now.
So you found the commonalities and then apply them, and then where the individual aspects are, you align with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I understand how businesses work. To be blunt, I understand how businesses make money, and I understand how to create more value that can then be shared in a fair way between getting a better product for customers, creating employment opportunities for my employees, and value for my shareholders.
Like a great producer will take somebody, right, their demo, and then make it just sound better, but maybe not totally rewrite it. But if it's already good, they
Mhm.
just put the shine on it. They put this
Yeah.
they make it sound so, but they don't try to restructure, total structural redesign of it.
Sure. Yeah, look, I've brought my own touches to the product, right? I think since I've joined, I've put a much greater emphasis on product quality, making sure the software doesn't have bugs. I put a much greater emphasis on simplicity. So I've demanded that certain features be killed because they're too complex or they're not useful. They make me as an end user confused. And if I'm confused, if the CEO of a software company is confused on how your software works, that your customer certainly will be. So look, I've certainly put my own touches on the software, but I think where I've been most impactful is building an organization that is resilient and
Mhm.
scalable.
Scalable. Yeah, so you got the resilience, so you can ramp up to
Yeah, and we can
whatever's
take a hit. Like if something bad happens to us tomorrow, I'm very proud to say that we don't have to fire our employees or scale back a big product launch or cut back of services that we're providing to our customer. We can
yeah,
just
no,
weather on because we are strong, we're resilient, but then we're also making all the investments needed to be aggressive for the future. We have some really cool products coming out or features coming out actually, I say products, they're not even features coming out in like 2 or 3 months, and that's us being aggressive and proactive towards the future.
that's important. So are you, is this company primarily have your one product or multiple products?
So historically, we only had one product, which is our ideas management solution. We about a year ago we added our whiteboarding solution, which is a fully independent module for people to do just online whiteboarding. Right? Imagine what you could do on a physical whiteboard, except now you can do it online. Over the next 2 or 3 months, we're launching a few more modules. Number one, we're launching a qualitative AI analytics module, and that basically allows you to take all this qualitative data that sits in an IdeaScale community and analyze it in a way that no human being ever could. And that's a really powerful use of AI
Oh,
to
the
analyze
data
qualitative
analytics?
data.
So you're
Yeah.
actually doing data.
But not quantitative analytics. Quantitative analytics is an easily solved problem, right? There's all these cool packages in Python or R that can do or Tableau to do quantitative analytics. We're doing analytics on ideas. Ideas don't have numbers in them. You can't add idea 1 and idea 2. You can't multiply idea 1 and idea 2. You can't divide them, right? So we figured out a very cool way on how you can use AI analytics to extract insights from both individual ideas and groups of complex ideas. That's really module number 1 that's coming out. So that'll be like product number 3. And then product number 4 is we're adding a full I always get my tongue tied on this, project portfolio management module that allows you to manage a whole bunch of things that are projects. When most companies don't just have one big project, they have a lot of small projects going on. How do you manage the portfolio of them? And that's coming out sometime next year as well. So we're pretty excited. There's a lot of things in that are in the oven right now.
So like program level projects or like sub projects, is that what you're talking about? Like,
so any organizations could define it differently. Like a drug company might have 20 different drugs they're working on. How do you manage the portfolio of those projects, right? Okay. So these are drugs that they've said, okay, we figured out that these drugs kind of work. Now we need to run 20 different trial programs, and we need to have 20 different research teams. We need to have 20 different marketing campaigns. How do you manage all that? That's where you don't use a single project management software. You have to manage a portfolio of projects. And that will allow you to go from a portfolio of ideas that we currently have to a full portfolio of projects that you can manage, which is kind of a cool and next natural transition.
That's interesting. So you got, I really intrigued by the idea of like doing like visualizations on, ideas rather than metrics. So being able to pull like some taking a like the ability of like a chat GPT type of idea system to pull out because the language capability of the system to kind of discern.
That's exactly it. I think we figured out a really clever way, because these large language models, whether it be ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, pick your favorite, generative, pick your favorite GPT, right? Yeah. One of their great powers that I think is people always talk about them as chatbots or smarter search engines, but their great power that is untapped is analyzing qualitative information, because so much information exists in what people say, what people write, and that can be analyzed beyond just and not just summarized. That's really cool. It's an undertapped power that we are hoping to tap really in a really effective manner.
Like language algorithms that are discerning like concepts.
But beyond that, so that's what's called a level 1 interpretation. Actually, that's technically a level 2 interpretation of language. Level 1 interprets syntax, like where's the verb, where's the noun, what tense is it. Level 2 summarizes information. Okay. Level 3 includes includes the context of qualitative or textual information, and level 4 analyzes information. Level 4 is really hard. It's for example, ChatGPT's Strawberry, which came out about 2 weeks ago. That is actually a reasoning engine, and everyone's talking about how it's fancier at doing math. But the real power of it is actually able to think and come up with new creative things for textual data. That's really powerful.
Yeah, so if you
it's creative, it's creative and rational. It can interpret ideas. That's cool.
So it can interpret it like an algebraic form of different, and maybe like a calculus or something more complicated.
Well, that's still level 2 thinking. It's gotten to level 4 thinking, which is it can understand and discern good versus bad. Good ideas versus bad ideas. It can also say, look, we have 2 bad ideas, but if we combine them together, does that a super bad idea, or are these 2 bad half-baked ideas together a fully baked cookie that's really good?
How do you teach it to understand what's good and what's bad? Like, how does it determine what the bad and the good?
Sure. So so that's part of the training set. The great thing is if you read enough, you generally get a sense of what's good and bad. If you read 1,000 books, you are able to tell this is a good book and this is a bad book, right? This is a good piece of art versus a bad piece of art. How does a human being learn to do it? Through lots and lots of experience. What these LLMs do is they are trained on extraordinary amounts of data. And if they are trained in a smart enough way, they discern good from bad. Like if you're a child and you just read books with no tutelage, you're not going to quite figure out which books are good and bad. But if you're a child who reads a bunch of books and you have a teacher who's advising you on here's what makes something good, then you
Mhm.
become really smart really fast. And that's what these level 4 GPTs are
Well, so they have like a
getting to
teacher
now.
helping them kind of discern or interpret what they've read, what they've learned.
Yes, exactly. They understand now and they can understand level 4 thinking involves something called quality, which is that we're now getting deep into philosophy. But people talk about moral virtues, good versus evil, like
Mhm.
chivalry, like whatever. You have all these moral virtues that differ in Western and Eastern philosophical traditions. But then there's this relatively recent philosophical concept that's come out over the last 100 or so years. What is quality? What do we mean when something is good? That's a really like fluffy concept if you think about it, but there's a lot of philosophical debate and some really good research on this. And the really powerful thing when we go back to AI is these AI tools are now able to figure out what is good, what is high quality, and that's really powerful and has historically been the domain of human beings.
Yeah, it's interesting because if the philosophy, you can do Sato or Camus, you could go into their concepts of philosophy, but this is probably more tactile. But like, so it's like the chat GPT, I read Moby Dick, and it's going to give me an assessment of what is good in Moby Dick and what is evil in Moby Dick.
But I don't mean good and evil. Sorry, no, I want to be clear. I wasn't talking about good and evil in a moral sense about like, God versus devil. I was talking about good versus bad quality,
Quality. But the
right?
idea that it could discern over time if it read enough books about the definition of what good is and evil.
Well, yeah, that now that's
Interesting.
getting into an area where I don't have expertise, and good, how one person defines good is a little bit different than
Another,
how
yeah.
another person does, and that
So
varies
it's
across
more
cultures,
tactile.
religions.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
I
it's
mean, it can be very deeply philosophical, but like, yes, machines can already discern good versus evil. We already know that machines are on average more moral than human beings. However, good can be is an ambiguous. It depends on the eye of the beholder, right? What is viewed as good in one religious tradition or one cultural tradition may be
yeah,
viewed as
crazy.
barbaric and evil in another.
Yeah, that depends on the bias, where you're coming from culturally or from a spirituality, for religion, all kinds of
Mhm.
factors that could make you define good or bad differently. But in terms
Yeah,
of like something that's more tactile for like business purposes, or in terms of an idea, the judge is something's good or bad.
but it's
That's interesting.
I want to push back on the word tactile because like compute these machines are now figuring out what is good art, right? And that's not necessarily something that's relevant to businesses, but is actually a higher order cognitive function where they can discern the quality of Moby Dick versus Nick's junk writings, right? I'm a
Mhm,
terrible writer or a very average writer.
mhm.
Moby Dick, I actually just finished reading it like a week ago, and that's written at a level which is like I don't know
Yeah.
what it is about Moby Dick that makes it good, but it is good. I can feel it
Well,
somewhere in
it's
my
that
bones.
classic it's that classic time period when the authors put, like, that level of work into it. There's a period of time in literature, the classics, where there's a certain level of, rigor and capability that these authors have that puts them at, like, this expert level versus somebody who comes in and just writes. You can write something, put it on Amazon as an online book. You wrote a book, but it's not gonna be Moby Dick.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but what is it? The guys who wrote Narnia and Lord of the Rings, they were all professors at Oxford and Cambridge. They were professors of English literature. So like these guys were not just writing fantasy novels with elves and like magic out of
Oh,
nowhere.
yeah.
Turns out they were experts in like
Yeah.
in language and literature. So they were
And
world class, right? And
Tolkien's like
T.S. Eliot,
Tolkien's
right?
yeah, Tolkien's a class. I mean, his stuff
Yeah.
is, like,
But
so deep.
Tolkien was a professor of like English literature.
It makes sense. It
He
makes sense
wrote part of
if
the
you
English dictionary. I don't know if you like he
yeah.
actually wrote like I think almost half of, or he wrote like 2000 entries for the letter W in the Oxford English Dictionary 100 years ago. Isn't that crazy? The guy actually
Well,
was
he's
the
a world
expert on the letter W in
well
anywhere in the world amongst
well, I
many other
mean,
things.
he was a world builder. He
Yeah.
turned the fantasy realm, he just had these ideas, but he had a craft, having some basics and training, it's probably the rigor of doing that gives you that kind of capability to be a
Mhm.
world builder, you know, because if you learn that kind of 10,000 hours of doing work, then it puts you in a frame that you could take that expertise. But we've had a really interesting conversation, and we do have your LinkedIn there. So if people connect with you there. That's how they get in touch with you.
Yep, exactly. I respond to 100% of messages. If someone wants to message me, my name is Nick Jain. I'm on LinkedIn. You see the link below. Would love to hear from you and help you out. Alternatively, if you're interested in our product, ideascale.com. Our software is completely free for organizations less than 100 people. Come check us out. If you're a larger organization, come be my customer. We are
Mhm.
best in class at what we do.
We do encourage people to connect with you on your LinkedIn and reach out to you, and do check out Idea Scale. It sounds like a really innovative approach. And we love having people talk about things like this. I haven't had anybody actually promote something to the effect of what you're doing today with Idea Scale. So I think people should check this out and see what it can do for their business.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Phantom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
You
Great
too.
night.